Thank you very much. I would like to start by saying thanks to the organizers of the conference, whose efforts in the middle of these difficult circumstances have made possible our meeting and have allowed us to participate and share our research. For that, thank you very much. Well, I will be presenting this topic from chained books to portable collections, Franciscan Libraries in Padua during the 15th century. Welcome. To start, we can just make a swift overview of the topics that will be considered in this presentation. First of all, I will be offering an introduction with basic information on mendicant orders, and then we will consider the relationship between mendicant orders and books, to then consider the modalities of book collection among mendicant orders and the case of mendicant libraries at Padua during the 15th century, specifically the case of the Biblioteca Antoniana and the case of the Library of San Francesco Grande, or the Library of the Reformed or Observant Friars. Then we will establish a comparison following the similarities and the differences, and finally a set of observations will be offered as a form of conclusion of this presentation. So, to start, we can say that mendicant orders flourished during the 13th century, that they were an expression of a renewal in the structures of society, and that they had links to the affirmation of urban mercantile groups within society. Mendicants were characterized by their flexibility, mobility, and devotion to poverty. This allowed them a remarkable adaptability. Additionally, mendicants established their houses or convents within urban conglomerates and kept always a close relation with the Holy See. The most influential mendicant groups were the preachers or Dominicans, the friars minor or Franciscans, the Augustine hermit or Augustinians, the Carmelites, and the Sack and Piet friars. The need of a discipline of study derives from mendicants' role as an asset to combat heresy. Mendicants established in their convents a program that allowed them to continue studies at the university. Study and rigorous practices of scholarship were possible thanks to a developed and efficient librarianship. Padua, a city in northern Italy, is an emblematic case. It had a prestigious university and was a center where mendicant orders flourished. Padua, additionally, offers an exceptional scenario. In Padua, there were two Franciscan libraries from two different families of the order, at the same time and for the same context, the friars of the community and the observants. This presentation will focus on the case of Padua and the Franciscan libraries. Further details will be available in the volume of the proceedings of the conference. Although mendicants favored study and learning, each community had a characteristic approach to book culture. Franciscans, for example, tried to reconcile poverty, apostolic life, and the original intention of the founder with the presence of books. Mendicants needed to find efficient ways of collecting and distributing books in their libraries. One of the solutions was the presence of a double collection. The double collection was a simple and efficient strategy to guarantee availability of books. It consisted of a collection of books deemed essential to study that should always remain in the library, usually chained to desks. A second collection, composed by copies, was destined to loan and circulation. The origins of this model of librarianship are to be found in a recommendation of a diocese synod in Paris in 1212. It was first applied by monasteries and adopted by mendicant and university colleges during the 13th century. Additionally, the need for long-term periods of use of books led to loans ad usum, namely for life. We have here an example that illustrates the case of a book considered ad usum according to the inscription left by a friar during the 13th century. Concerning the Franciscan libraries at Padua, we could start by saying that Franciscans in Padua had an active presence from 1229 onwards. Most probably, Anthony of Padua established the studium of Franciscans at the very origins, and there was a close relation between the convent and the university. Eventually, the convent became, after Assisi, the most important Franciscan center in Italy. Therefore, the Biblioteca Antoniana could count with a great collection of books. Later, during the first half of the 15th century, the foundation of a hospital in Padua allowed the arrival of the Reformed Franciscans or observants. Their convent at Padua became one of the most important centers of the Franciscan observance in Italy, and in 1470 it became a studium. The library of the observants was not as impressive as that of the conventuals, but provided friars with the tools needed to study, preach, and pastoral care. The Library of Sant'Antonio, or Biblioteca Antoniana, which is the library of the friars of the community or conventuals, is an ancient library whose origins could be located shortly after 1229. The collection grew through bequests, donations, and even acquisition of books. The question of the internal scriptorium is a question that deals with the forms by which this collection was enhanced. In 1290, a chapter gathered in the city of Treviso. The chapter, among the many dispositions, the chapter issued one that said that there should be a permanent scriptor in the convents of the Venetian province. This has led to think that there was a permanent scriptorium in the convent of Sant'Antonio. However, we must keep in mind that these dispositions usually describe an ideal to achieve and not the reality of the convents, and we have no evidence of the continuous presence of a scriptorium within the convent. In any case, as we can see here, the Biblioteca Antoniana has remained in its original location and did not suffer, luckily, the Napoleonic suppressions that happened by the end of 18th century. Regarding the Library of Sant'Antonio, we can say that the medieval collection is described in two inventories carried out in 1396 and 1449. The inventories are registered in two manuscripts. The first one is the Pontificia Biblioteca Antoniana Padua, manuscript 572, and the second one is the 573. We have examples, two folios, so from the second one, from the manuscript 573. This manuscript provides information on the location of the volumes, using the word scaffa for desk or banca for cupboard, their title, their incipit, the incipit of the second quire, and the explicit of the volume. It includes also a list of the books on loan, as well as a list of books considered lost. The manuscript 573 reveals a collection of near 1,024 volumes distributed along 53 repositories. The library had a double collection. There were books for consultation, changed to desks or bancae, plus copies for loans stored in cupboards or scaffae. The order of registration follows the organization of the space, and this has allowed us to outline the distribution of books. In this scheme, we can see the distribution of books in the space of the library. The space was divided in two sides, the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Each side had a series of benches and cupboards. And as we can see, for the case of the left-hand side, there were 14 benches, each of one had a specific set of books. Bench number 1 had Bible, Book of Sentences, the Divine Comedy. The second one had the commentaries to the sentences, theological treatises, and so on. So in these benches, the left-hand side and the right-hand side, there were the books for consultation only, and these books were chained. Behind these benches, there came the cupboards, with copies of these books chained, available for loan. On the right-hand side, it happened exactly the same. We had 12 cupboards. On the left-hand side, we had 13 cupboards. It is interesting to see that the cupboards containing the copies available for loan were located on the opposite side of the benches. So we can see that the exemplars of the Bible, the Book of Sentences, and the Divine Comedy had the respective copies for loan on the opposite side. So it's a very interesting way of distributing and keeping the balance of the collection for loan and the collection for consultation. The core of the library of the collection was the set of sermons, the commentaries to the Book of Sentences, and the theological volumes. The prevalent manuscript is a mid-sized parchment volume containing a single work or a selection of works by one author. As I mentioned before, the interesting feature of the distribution is that the copies for loans were located on the opposite side of the benches. A case that helps to understand the practices of circulation is the set of the copies of the commentary to the first Book of Sentences by Bonaventure of Bagnoregio. As we can see here, is a set for the first commentary to the first book, a set of 4 manuscripts. I have studied them and I have established the order of arrival and the way in which these incoming manuscripts were checked, using as a model the already chained books for consultation, and how once they were completely corrected, they were chained and the previously chained books were released for loan, keeping in that way the permanent circulation of copies of books deemed essential. On the other hand, we have the Library of San Francesco Grande. This was the library of the Franciscan observants, and this library dates from the second half of the 15th century. The original set of books was brought by the friars upon their arrival. The collection grew through bequests, donations, and acquisition of new materials. There is no evidence of an internal scriptorium within the convent. However, most of the volumes were personal compilations of works. The collection had fewer books than the Biblioteca Antoniana. It had near 200 manuscripts, and it was enough to satisfy the needs of the community of friars. There are not complete inventories of the medieval collection. Instead, there is the list of items carried out on the request of the Congregation of the Index of Prohibited Books in 1600. The library suffered the Napoleonic suppression, and most of the volumes are currently available at the Biblioteca Universitaria di Padua. Concerning the collection, there is not evidence of a double collection in the library. Only 5 out of 170 volumes were produced before the 15th century. The main thematic clusters of the collection were, first, a set of postils, commentaries, treatises on vices and virtues, a set of miscellanies of treatises on different topics by masters of the order, and, of course, the works of the most influential observant preachers, Bernardino of Siena and John of Capistrano. A second thematic cluster was conformed by the works of Thomas Aquinas, Antoninus of Florence, masters of the Dominican order, and a set of treatises on vices and virtues, and treatises useful for preaching and composition of sermons. And there was a third thematic cluster, which we could say were the books of preferences, books useful as tools for the preparation of sermons, and books of permanent consultation, like book of general references, astronomy, books on history, classics, and natural sciences. The core of the collection were the commentaries, the apostles, and treatises, followed by the treatises on the institutional life of the order. These manuscripts were mainly produced by their own readers, and the prevalent form of the manuscript is the small format paper miscellany. We have on the right-hand side 3 examples of the way in which these paper manuscripts were presented to their own writers. This allows us to establish a brief comparison between the libraries that we have just described. First of all, we can talk about the similarities. They had a strong similarity in aim. The aim was to answer to the need of an efficient tool for the education and training of friars devoted to study and pastoral care. Second similarity is that each collection had an emphasis, a topic or thematical emphasis. In the case of the Biblioteca Antoniana, we have a collection of sermons as the core of the collection, and that was collected around the masters of the order. The Biblioteca of San Francesco Grande focused on commentaries, apostles, and treatises. A third similarity is that the libraries followed strategies to achieve efficiency. The Biblioteca Antoniana had a double collection, employed the loans ad usum, and had this system that I just described of check and chaining the volumes. The Library of San Francesco Grande had a set of personal compilations and employed extensively the loans ad usum, as we can see an example here. But perhaps more interesting are the differences. The first, of course, is the age. The Biblioteca Antoniana is an ancient library with a strong tradition. The Biblioteca of San Francesco Grande was a recent library of a reformed community. Another point of difference is the profile of the friars or users during the 15th century. While the conventual friars, that is, the readers of the Biblioteca Antoniana, were readers and collectors of volumes for studying and preaching, observant friars were readers and writers of volumes for preaching and pastoral care. This led also to striking differences in terms of the codicological and paleographical features. The Biblioteca Antoniana collected books that were generally mid-format parchment volumes containing single works or compilations of individual authors, not written by their readers. The Biblioteca of San Francesco Grande had small format volumes in paper, usually textual or codicological miscellanies, written by their own readers. And as an example, we have 2 manuscripts here. The first one comes from the Biblioteca Antoniana, is a life of St. Francis. The second one comes from the Biblioteca of San Francesco Grande and is a miscellany with a treatise. In this case, these are notes useful for preaching and the composition of sermons. So we can propose some observations under the form of a conclusion. First of all, efficient libraries were closely linked to the activity of mendicant studia. Second, The availability of books was an essential feature of these libraries. We can also say that a comparison between the libraries allows us to understand the practices of circulation of knowledge within the Franciscan communities. We have observed similarities in purpose, efficient use of resources, and support for the convent as a studium. But we have seen also striking differences in tradition, the size of the collection, the types of manuscripts and topics of study. The typology of manuscripts was also related to practices of writing within the communities. So we can say that books, and therefore libraries, became a fundamental part of the identity of mendicant orders, in the specific case of the communities of Franciscans, but we can apply this to mendicant orders in general. We can say also that efficient libraries were at the core of the studia in mendicant convents. We can say also that mendicants assimilated and adapted the model of the double collection already in use within monasteries, Benedictine monasteries. Mendicants' libraries were libraries of study and therefore libraries of scholarship. And that is why mendicant libraries are usually defined as modern libraries. However, we have to keep in mind that awareness of the monastic legacy and the search for forms of providing, distributing, and locating knowledge are practices at the core of medieval written culture. And therefore, we can say that mendicant libraries can be considered as the ultimate expression of the extraordinary medieval librarianship. Thank you very much.